Welcome to Pretty Owl Poetry's online reading series. Today we are here with Darren C. Demaree, and he is the author of As We Refer to Our Bodies and Temporary Champions, as well as Not for Art Nor Prayer, which is set to come out in 2015. He's managing editor of the Best of the Net Anthology, and he is currently living in Columbus, Ohio with his wife and children. So, welcome.
Nice to meet you guys.
So you can go ahead and start reading whenever you would like.
Sure. I thought for tonight I'd read some of the poems from the most recent book that's come out, Temporary Champions. And for those who don't know sort of the story of everything behind this, there was a title fight between an Ohioan named Ray Mancini and the Asian champ, Duk Koo Kim. And it was a big fight. They built an arena for it in Reno, Nevada, and it was on live television. Mancini killed Kim on live television in the 14th round of the fight. And so I wrote a book about the crowd, a poem for each round of the fight, and then all sort of actually went poems from that. Round one. How exultant the exclamation of sport, no build, no guard to build, only the wet stone that is two men glancing off each other's intent. The only grief a muscle feels is the light touch of air, of nothingness, and when worlds are built vanish, the same as moisture in the air, not in flight, not in direction. So there's a poem for each round. There's a sequence of poems about the crowd in here, because anytime it's a big fight, everyone sort of comes out in their finest garb and gets dressed up, goes out and does the whole night. So Frank Sinatra was there, Bill Cosby was there, a whole bunch of people. And so the idea that not only was it a nationally televised fight, but it was an event that people to watch someone die sort of became the backbone of the collection. The audience a much bigger part of it. The country must have been thrilled to watch the sacrifice, the weekend. Animals, of flesh, of cheering hands, of half-humans, watchers. Fools of the moon waiting for the son of the Korean to crash into the desert, demanding that his face be made out of paper mache. It was made out of bone. That thing protruding from his face was a jawbone. From above, the cameras which brought the rest of us into the arena, you can see them begin to cloud. Too much for the machines, their electric bouncing made emotional by the tenderizing of such human meat, such swollen agendas bought to be enjoyed, that rattle, the shuttle shake of death's favorite call, the needless song of because we can do such. I had never written anything about boxing, and I didn't know anything about boxing. It was more of the story of these two guys coming together and what happened. And so I spent about 6 months reading everything that had been written about boxing. I read Boxiana by Pierce Egan. I read Perfect in Their Art, which was a collection of boxing poems. I read old boxing reporting. I didn't have the vernacular to write about boxing. I didn't know what the different phrases meant and how to use them correctly. All my sports time was spent in baseball. And so after a long time doing that, I found the fight on YouTube. You can watch the entire fight on YouTube because it was a nationally televised thing. And so I ended up watching the fight. Every time I would write poems about it for about, the 4 months after that. And so I think roughly I watched the whole fight about 250 times. And instead of music, which was normally my thing, to pick a soundtrack and try to keep some of these long sequences I do together to have some sort of thread to them. So watching the fight sort of wore me down, and I actually stopped writing about maybe 2 weeks or a month earlier. So there's a poem in here about that called "Because I Tried to Like It Very Much." I watch it now, the fight. Almost every day fight the urge to map the blows and guess where weakness first decided it was not welcomed by men like this. Not welcomed by men that fight out of instinct, poor men raised on fighting to be men, and I still watch it, the fight. Unable to root for Mancini, unable to root for Kim, to beat him. I watch it now almost every day, knowing the last two rights are coming, knowing the canvas will double as a coroner's bag, knowing that my vision of what a man really is can be found in round 13, but learning I am not much of an enthusiast for what it is men can do. The craziness sort of happened, everything leading up to the fight, and the fact that, unfortunately a young man died in the fight. After that, things got weirder. Kim's mom, who had sort of married up trying to sustain some sort of fortune for her family in Korea, went home after he died and took arsenic and killed herself because her soon-to-be champion, her son, was dead. The referee from the fight, Richard Green, made it about 6 months after that, and was either killed in a mob hit or killed himself. Sort of attributed to what had happened. And then Kim's girlfriend, who was pregnant at the time with what they found out was a son later on, tried to marry him after he was already dead. She tried to go through this whole scenario through the Korean government to get his death benefits. It was really sort of weird. And she'd hold press conferences and say things like, "There's a fighter, there's a champion in my belly," and it just got sort of weirder and weirder after that. So the story, it didn't stop. But one of the things that sort of wore me down, because I didn't have any exposure to the boxing stuff, was sort of how my opinion of boxing changed afterwards. I was sort of nonchalant about it. I liked the story, and then by the end of it, I sort of couldn't stand it really at all. And so there were some poems towards the end of the book, like this one. It's called "I Understand the Lions." Blood notes the revival of teeth in men of meat, appears to be glory from animals, taken to be decorated, and why? It's a sham, a half measure, to be perfect in sport and allow such death. If we are going to eat each other, damn it, let's get to it. So that's sort of one of the things that by the end of it, I was sort of just wanting to get rid of the whole sport. And there was always those rumors that boxing or MMA would end up out in barges or something like that. But it's just, there's too much money involved for that to ever happen. But it's surprising. And ultimately, I ended up dedicating this book to my son, who's real young. But mostly because the fathers of the two men sort of pushed themselves. They were poor men who hadn't quite made anything, and then they forced their sons to fight for all this money. And so by the end of it, I was feeling very sort of tender towards my own son and hoping that he would not have to ever fight someone for bread or money, or to and hopefully never have to take someone's life in that aspect, in that search. So that's sort of what Temporary Champions was about, and all the stuff I went through to write that. Did you folks want me to read some other poems or anything like that?
Yeah, I think we have time if you want to. Maybe like a couple.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've gentleman mentioned Not for Art Nor Prayer. That's going to come out later this year, as well as I just got picked up another book that's going to come out sooner. called The Pony Governor, which is a collection of political poems. It's going to be out on after the Pause Press. But my first book and the one this winter came out on Eighth House. And so I'll read a couple poems from that. This is in some fun sections. There's an Ohio section. There's black and white pictures, which is poems about sonograms. And then I write a lot of these Emily As poems. There's sort of a different formula to write love poems. And I write a lot of them. So let me read a couple of those and a couple others, and then we'll stop there. All right. So Emily is a leveling of the ground. Across the snow, the sea change of Ohio, the axe splits wood as an empty threat to the whole world. But then again, hands can motion the life right out of this thing. Personally involved in the end of the world, what the living do is command the rags and muscles to be easy with pleasure, to take the blanket and pull it over all heads, to kick legs like an ornery child, a knowing child with a flat surface, to give it to an eyelid. I found Emily. That means I am ready for the rest of you to close your eyes. And my friend Christopher Michael, who's a poet as well, always favors this one. This is Emily as Unswerving Realism. Idaho, you are cold in the field, harsh, torn trees, driving men in 2 jackets to a bar with 1 tap. Emily, I know the wheat is a metaphor, but when my hand touches your nipple, it feels the breast around it as well. Let this cold truth keep me warm, even in the unimaginable desolation. The first book has got some of the oldest poems. As everyone's trying to get that first book together, it becomes sort of like a greatest hits of things that have been published and things you're fairly convinced can get your first book published. And so the first section of the book was called Directions for Leaving, which was sort of an arbitrary title to couch all of these poems that had no place in any of the sequences that were in the book. And so these are all sort of from different stages. This is called Tip of the Whiskey. It used to be called the George Jones song, but I had the editor Ryan Hilborn, who was fantastic and helped me with this one, got me to change the title. So Tip of the Whiskey. I trip on the whiskey, I banged my head on the whiskey at the top of the stairs, slammed stars against and with the whiskey, felt the she in her best woman parts with the whiskey, cried whiskey, more with whiskey with the whiskey, and cried whiskey when everything went. This is the oldest one in the book. I think I wrote this my first year at Miami of Ohio when I was in grad school, when I was about 22. And my father, who still lives in Knox County where I grew up, really wanted me to put this book out with a disclaimer that this story didn't really happen. Because he still lives there, and when people from my home bought the book, they were sort of like, well, what was Darren doing at those fairs? But this one's called Knox County Fair. She asked me to put her in a headlock, her tensed lips straining for air, naked ass arched towards the fluorescent lights of the tent. We, like barnyard animals, desperate, bent over bricks of straw, her mouth digging into the soft part above my elbow, the dirty tears streaming down my forearms, cries for a transformation that she could touch, something past I-71, dreams of a place with satin sashes instead of cotton, something stronger than my arms, a life that could knock the breath out of her and to sustain her body in a constant motion. Anyway, so he really would like me to tell everyone that, that didn't happen. Yes.
All right. Thank you. That was so great.
No, you're welcome.
I think I'm going to start out. I'm glad you read some of the Emily poems.
Okay.
Because, of course, like, we published, the Emily As the Seed is the Harvest. And I've seen online you have other poems, too. So I was hoping you could talk about the inspiration behind the series and if you see it as a project, or, I mean, is there an end in sight, or do you think this is just going to be like a series of poems that you keep coming back to? Like, what do you see if, as the is the project going to keep growing, etc.? Oh, I think we're.
You lost Darren.
Yeah, I think we're a little frozen right now. Hopefully he'll come back. I think my question was too long, so I broke the internet with my too long question.
No, I apologize. I knew you were asking a question, but I couldn't hear it. It faded in and out.
That's okay, because it was really long and cumbersome, so I'll try and shorten it up this round for the second one. Okay, so I wanted,
Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to see if you could talk about the inspiration behind the Emily poems, and if this is a
Sure.
project that's going to keep growing, or if you have like an end in sight, if you want to make it one big book, or where you see the project going.
Right. Well, the project started, I'd say, about 8 or 9 years ago. I'd sort of gotten exhausted by the traditional love poems and was trying to come up with a way to do it. And I think the first one I wrote was Emily as a Bird. And sort of the challenge of this sort of formula of Emily as something else, and then trying to write a poem that made it work. And so I think overall, I've written over 1,000 of them at this point.
Oh, wow.
And they seem to be,
Oh, I think we're losing you. We should have music to play whenever we're having
I
technical.
was going to say, intermission music.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I think it's a connectivity issue.
Yeah. Gordon, is that you? Oh, you're playing music. I thought it was a cell phone. Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness. We lost him completely. All right. Should we...
It's not a pretty hour rating unless we have somebody fall off.
Someone essential to the reading.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least we got to hear a lot of, poetry and stuff, so.
Yeah. Should we take this off live now?
I would wait. Let's see if he joins us. We're still recording.
Okay.
So let's just see if he comes back, and if he doesn't come back within the next 2 minutes, I guess we could call it, unless Kelly wants to read us some of her poetry.
No, that's okay.
He actually answered some questions just sitting there talking about himself that I was going to ask, so.
Actually, he asked the questions I had about Ohio, too, so.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So he interviewed himself already.
Yeah, there you go. That's efficient right there.
What, should I put in a plug for our upcoming reading?
Yeah, sure.
Go, do it.
Okay, so anyone who is watching this, if you watch this in the next week, exactly 1 week from today, in Pittsburgh, I will be hosting Matthias Lavina, Joshua Marie Wilkinson, and Noah Eli Gordon at Classic Lines Bookstore in Squirrel Hill, 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. The owner, Dan Iddings, is opening up the shop just for the occasion, which is fantastic because nowhere is open on Sunday nights in Pittsburgh. So it's worked out beautifully. The poets will have books to sell. And Matthias will be featured in our next issue, which will be coming out very soon. So,
with the
what's that?
Coming out with the first day.
Yeah,
of spring.
he'll be in first day of spring. I don't know when that is. That's why I didn't say the date.
Oh,
I don't know when our
March,
deadline is. It's fine.
sorry, it's March 21st. March 21st. So we might, I guess March 20th is a Friday, so maybe it'll come out then. I don't know.
Yeah, or that weekend maybe, or the Monday, something. Maybe we'll give ourselves the weekend. It's coming soon to the internet near you.
All right. Well, should we wrap it up? I don't know if he's coming back.
Yeah.
Can you shoot him another interview or another invite?
I did.
Oh. Well, maybe we can do some follow-up questions with him.
Oh, wait.
Wait, Darren's back. Darren's back.
Wait, sorry.
Okay.
Darren, we're so glad you're back. We played music and we did a plug for our next reading.
Time
And
for the world's shortest drinking game. Sorry, I will finally answer the Emily question.
Okay, great.
So I've written a lot of them, and some are in the first book, and some are going to be in what is now going to be the fourth book. And there's been an interesting sort of metamorphosis of how they've changed, and I think some of them started with more pure intentions, and then really trying to find all of the degrees of an actual adult relationship, and just, when you say that you love someone on that day, it could be 1%, it could be 40%, and trying to really insert some of those real life situations. The real life situations might be the impetus for it, but they're all pretty abstract and difficult for me to get the equation to work the way I want. And so that's the challenge for me to make them all, and they're not all positive. They're not all 100% love, right? Some of them are 10%, some of them are 20. So I'd reached the point. I went to Knoxville, Tennessee last fall and taught a workshop on. It was called UGG, teaching people how to write love poetry that doesn't suck, I think was essentially the title. And one of the things I talked about was, people finally granting more access to love poems that were more searching and not necessarily either overtly lovely, overtly sexual, or overtly breakup poems. And so that was one of the things we worked on at that. And afterwards, the group down in Tennessee, the Sundress group, are mostly incredibly dedicated female writers and artists, and I'm lucky enough that I get to hang out with them, and I'm editing the Best of the Net for them and things like that. But I sort of put it to all those ladies and asked them the question: well, is me doing this and writing poems about someone who's real, is that more abuse than homage? Is it sort of using Emily, who's a real person, and my wife? Is it sort of using her more than honoring her or speaking lovingly about her because of sort of the tactics that I'm using and how I'm trying to hit all the percentages, not just Emily is the moon, Emily is the sun, things like that. And they were sort of divided about it, and I think ultimately liked the poems and wanted to hear more. I did a reading in Columbus a few weeks ago where I read an Emily As poem that is essentially her getting excited about being Emily at poetry readings, because she'll come with me to some, and people will ask her, "Oh, well, what do you think about that? You're Emily. You're a real, And sort of in that poem, she got real excited and loved the fact that she was getting the attention, and so the whole poem ends with me sort of saying that I've gotten away with it. Because it could be perceived poorly. She could take it badly. There's an argument to be made that I'm sort of using a person to get something out of her instead of just loving her, right? And so those are all questions that I've been asking recently. And for a while, I thought I might be done, and I thought sort of that poem would be a nice sort of capstone to the 8 or 9 years of writing them. And then I'd finished a new project a couple weeks ago, and immediately started writing some more Emily As poems, sort of as a palate cleanser to get ready for the next thing. So it could be a thing where I just write them, and maybe they'll find themselves into books, or maybe ultimately, maybe I'll hold on to them since I've been doing more project-based things like the boxing poems or like the political poems. Maybe they'll just all come out in some giant volume of 400 or 500 Emily As poems at some point. But they are successful, and they're still difficult to write and fun to write. So we'll see if and when that ever ends.
As a follow-up, I know you talked about the poem that you wrote about Emily being, Emily in the poem being excited about the attention.
Right.
But I am curious, like, how does your wife feel about being the subject of your poetry?
Yeah, she plays a role for sure. I think the ones that are more tender, the ones that are especially loving, I'll print out and leave for her. Mm-hmm. The ones where I'm sort of exploring ways in which adults sort of feel each other out and clash on certain things. She'll read them when they get published, and if she's got issues with it, she's fairly mum, or she'll give me a look or something like that. But I think for the most part, she likes it and appreciates it, and she knows that even if it's something that I'm sort of trying to work myself through the field of whatever's going on, that my attention is towards her and trying to figure things out, even if it's not necessarily a resolution. But for the most part, she enjoys it.
I guess I can ask a quick question. You kind of already answered it a little bit through the additional poems that you read, but
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, it seems like you're a native Ohio native. Anyway, I was wondering how Ohio plays a role in your work.
When I was, let's say, 21 or 22, 23, I was sort of, well, let's get the hell out of Ohio kind of thing. I'd done college at the College of Worcester, and was all set to move actually to Charleston to do grad school at the College of Charleston. And then Miami of Ohio came with sort of a better offer. And I had a friend there who's a fiction writer named Steve Kowalski. And Steve sort of helped me fall back in love with Ohio. He was sort of unabashedly loved everything about Ohio, and we were both Cleveland Indians fans and Browns fans. And I've never known anyone that sort of owned who he was better than Steve Kowalski. And I sort of started going, just because I've been in Ohio, that doesn't mean that Ohio's not great, and starting to find things. And moved with Steve eventually to Alabama, but I only made it in Alabama for a month before I came back to get Emily. I literally moved and then very quickly abandoned to come back to Ohio and Emily. And so right now there's a lot of, when I write about Ohio, mostly it's a celebration. The political poems, obviously, not so much, as you can tell by the title of The Pony Governor, but definitely a place in my heart, and I can't really imagine moving somewhere else. And at this point, it's not just that my family's here and the families around us, because God knows you need grandparents to step in and just hand the children to every once in a while. But I don't think I'd want to go anywhere else. This is just going to be where you'll be able to find me, except on vacations. But other than that, I'll be here.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
That was my main question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jeb. All right. Yeah, I mean,
It's the DJ.
you said you spent like 6 months writing up the temporary champions, researching and everything like that. And then before that, you said these probably you spend your whole life writing your first book. So
Yeah,
then that's
everything
the
always.
time for that.
Hmm?
And well, my question was, you have Pony Governor, Not for Art Nor Prayer, and then
Uh-huh.
Many Full Hands Applauding Inelegantly, set
Yeah.
up for about a year after that. You're a booked man. Like, what goes into that? What goes into that? How do you churn out 3 books in, like, such a short period of time? Are you constantly writing, or?
Well, yeah. Actually, it's something that I'd say on average, um, anywhere from 20 to 30 poems a week. It's just something I do every day. I don't take days off. I think I've taken 3 days off in the last maybe 5 years, and that was for my 5th anniversary trip. That was a promise I made. Um, but if you could see below my computer here, you would see all of these post-it notes and plans and things like that for things I'm working on now and things that are coming up. So I don't just have those things picked up. I've actually got a collection of poems called Bombing the Thinker, which is all about when someone blew up Rodin's The Thinker up at the Cleveland Museum of Art. And that took as much research and sort of visiting the museum as Temporary Champions did. And that's completely written and edited. And then I wrote a collection of prose poems called Unfinished Murder Ballads, and that's done as well. And I've got some other things I need to edit. But yeah, it's just sort of constant. And it's not anything that like when I have conversations with other writers about what they're working on and things like that, I tend to stay quiet for the most part because I want to hear first what they're working on, and second, my sort of process is such sort of a deluge of effort and work and research that sometimes I just sound either like a zealot or like an asshole. I'm not sure how it gets taken, but it's all sort of planned out, and I can honestly tell you, what I'm working on now, what's coming up next, probably up to maybe 9 months or a year in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, someone will slow me down, or just people will stop wanting to read or stop wanting books or things like that. But you fight so long to get that first book out that once you've figured out how to do that in the process it takes to be successful, it's sort of like, kicking against the ocean, and all of a sudden a wave goes from where your feet were kicking, and you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to keep doing that.
Right.
And sort of both wary of stopping and feeling like I'm getting somewhere and being successful, and not just getting the things pick up, but trying to write new things and trying to write about different things. I'm not writing Emily As poems constantly. It's these research things and trying to figure out new ways I can put my voice and mess with it and try different things. I wrote these Wednesday morning poems that were all on a syllable count, and I have absolutely no form to my poems anywhere except for when I do prose poems. Otherwise it's pretty free verse and things like that. So just to try to keep pushing it different ways. And there are some times where I feel fatigued on writing poems, and that's when I'm sort of really excited to see what I'll write that day, because I'm like sort of angry at the process.
Right.
And that's a different guy than I normally am. So what is that guy going to come up with? And so.
Yeah. So yeah, right. And you said that about with the boxing poems.
Yeah.
Eventually, you stopped writing poems about the boxing match and about your response to the boxing match.
Well, and that was sort of an emotional need. I got just sad. I got sad about watching these two guys. Essentially. And if you ever do watch the fight, Mancini didn't get out of there clean. He got himself beat up too.
Yeah.
And so it just sort of wore me down. I wasn't used to that sort of violence that often. So.
Right. Well, I mean, that's interesting. I'm sorry, Kel, were you gonna say something there?
Well, I wanted to jump in real quick while we're talking about like the process of writing books, because
Sure.
whenever you were talking before, you were talking about about putting together your first book and how you had some older stuff in there, and I was curious, like, if the process has changed for you now that you wrote more books. Like, how is it different and similar to whenever you put together your first book?
Well, the process is different in terms of I've got, I don't have to comb through 5 years of stuff to sort of pick a greatest hit sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But I can sort of figure out which of these projects are going to make it to book length. The title for the first book was As We Refer to Our Bodies, and the only reason that it was the title was I had written an entire sequence of poems called As We Refer to Our Bodies, and it had completely bombed. Like, it wasn't very good. It's not that just people weren't wanting to publish them, it's just that I read it, and they were all pretty bad. but I loved the title so much, I took it and sort of, it worked that way. But now on some of the things where there are like bigger research projects, I can figure out what will work well as a volume. And the one that's going to be longer is the mini full hands applauding inelegantly. That's actually 3 book-length sequences. It's the We Are Arrows, the violin sound at almost every place, and then All the Birds Are Leaving. And they're all book-length sequences put together. They're all humanist sequences. And so if it stays as it is right now, and it really might get pushed to 2017, so we'll see, what it looks like then. But it's about 250 pages right now.
Ooh.
So we'll see. But I can sort of figure which ones are standalone volumes. But part of the process that I've got going now is that if I try something and it completely falls on its face, and say I spent 3 months doing it, that's okay. It's okay that those 100 or 120 poems or whatever it is ends up just not hitting the mark, because I've got the next thing I'm going to try already lined up and researching and things like that. So there's a certain, it sounds burdensome when I talk about that much writing, but it's actually a little bit freeing, because I can try all these different things and all these different approaches and not sweat it if it doesn't work.
That's amazing, because I don't know how you do that.
Well, it's easy
I just want to
once,
hold on to my stuff,
when the first book comes out, to look at it and say, okay, this is the writer I need to be to put books out, and to write more poems like that. Mm-hmm. And so I was lucky enough, right before the first book came out, 8th House went ahead and picked up the second book. They said, okay, we want to do another one with you already. And so at that point, either the craziness or the ego takes over, and you're sort of like, well, all right, let's just see what I can get away with and what I can try. Yeah. And sort of, I haven't gotten slowed down yet. I'm sure that's coming, but right now I feel sort of like I can reach and try different things.
That's great.
I ask probably every single interview the same question. So sure. For someone who's constantly writing, it actually probably applies very well. In world of internet, text messages being sent out 24/7, emails all over the place, all these kind of being somewhat poem length. How do you differentiate just between a normal text message you send to your wife and an Emily As poem? How do you differentiate from a normal email you send to someone, and what constitutes a poem?
Right.
Where do you draw the line?
Well, that's where it gets sort of fun and argumentative, right? I mean, if I put my name and contact info on it and submit it as a poem, does it count as a poem at that point if it was just a text message?
Exactly.
Maybe, and I think we read some more inventive poems that are put together that way, in a different sort of electronic fashion, and sort of both trying to capture that sort of immediacy of our communication and trying to sort of put the finger up to the establishment of this is a poem. No, this isn't a poem. So what you're saying is probably just all right. Like it could all be poetry.
Right.
I've got my own sort of setup to it that I'm such a poor text messenger. I've got a cheap old phone, so the text that I could get from that probably wouldn't be worth much in terms of a poem. But other than that, I mean, the argument is that if someone if the poet says it's a poem, you got to go with them until you can prove them wrong. Essentially, you know.
Right. So whatever works.
Yeah. Well, which is part of both the fun and maddening part of people trying to put labels on poetry. And there's even just been a tremendous boom in sound poetry over the last 10 years, and what those people can do is just astounding. It's not something that necessarily I can do well because I don't have the background in recording or in music to do some of those things. But some of the things that they can pull off is incredible. So I don't, you know, if it's an audio file, it can still be a poem. I don't need to see the text.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that probably then just about wraps it up. So
All right.
thank you,
I
everyone.
apologize for the blip earlier. We're good now. We're fine.
Right. Yeah. For some reason, now the internet has fixed after Kelly's very long question. So then, if you want to make any closing statements, it's fine. Otherwise, I believe that we should.
Oh yeah, do you have a book or anything coming out that you want to plug for, or anything like that?
Well, we've got the temporary champions actually had a no compete clause in the contract, so I've got to wait until July for the next book. But that'll be the Pony Governor with After the Pause Press, and then a few months after that will be Not for Art Nor Prayer from Eighth House. This next week, I'm going up to Cleveland to read at the B-Side Liquor Lounge and Arcade with Aubrey Hirsch, who's incredible from Pittsburgh, Erin Elizabeth Smith, who's she's in charge of Sundress, Adam Gellings, James DeMonte, and Aubrey's husband, Devin Goldstein, who's a writer as well. So we'll have some fun amidst all the arcades and bars and so forth. But that'll be next Sunday, I think at 6 o'clock.
Awesome. Well, then thank you, and everyone should check that out. So, goodbye, everyone.
All right. Have a good weekend, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.